Look around us. Your children would be trapped in the past, if not for me. Their worlds are carved from the jade that I gave purpose. I promised them a future. A century of progress cannot end this way. I'll find a way to save us all.
Happy Friday. Welcome to Guild Chat. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be giving you a look at the 3 End of Dragons Elite Specializations that we showed you earlier this week. Then next week you'll be able to try them out for yourself in our first End of Dragons Elite Specialization beta event. One quick note before we get started, I wanted to let those of you know who are playing that we have a balance patch coming next Tuesday, and after the show is over, we're going to have some preview notes for you. So as soon as we're done here, head over to the forums. Right now, I know you are eager to get a better look at those elite specs, so let's get right into it and start with our dev guests. Hi, Indigo.
Hi, I'm Indigo. I'm a narrative designer and writer on End of Dragons and Guild Wars Live. I've been helping with the Golden Path. I'm a content owner from one of our open world maps that we'll talk about at a later date, and I've been helping ground the elite specializations with some really rich lore, which is why I'm here today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And Cal, hey.
Hi, happy to be here. I'm Cal Cohen, game designer, work a lot on PvP and War vs. World, End of Dragons. I did a lot of work on elite specializations, so I'm here to show some of those off, and I'm really excited to do so.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Let's get right into it and start with the Harbinger.
Yeah, let's talk about the Harbinger.
All right, Indigo, why don't you give us some background on what the Harbinger is all about? Because we saw the video earlier this week, but...
Yeah, absolutely. So the Harbinger is a really, really fun class, and it's a little bit of a tonal breakaway from what we're used to with the Necromancer, which are traditional summoners in a fantasy realm. They're summoning the dead. But the Harbinger specifically is our mixture between a snake oil salesman meets an Old West gunslinger. So it's very fun, and it's a little nefarious and really unpredictable. But in Cantha, people have discovered that you can extract ancient magic from the jade as a result of the jade wind. And the Harbingers, who are also very adept alchemists, have realized that they can take that energy and imbue it into their elixirs as well as their bullets for their main hand pistol. And the result is incredibly deadly and noxious, and I think players are going to have a lot of fun with it.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, let's take a look and have Cal run us through how it works.
All right, let's do it. So Harbinger, right, pistol necro, elixirs, cool stuff. Important note for the balance update. Harbinger Shroud is actually something that Scourge does right now, but not anymore. We're renaming that to Sandstorm Shroud, a lot more thematic. And since we now have a character called the Harbinger, it probably makes sense that Harbinger Shroud belongs to the Harbinger. So let's dive in here. There's actually a lot of stuff going on with the Shroud mechanic on the Harbinger, so let's just start going over them. First off, let's see if as long as you are in combat and you have life force, you're going to see that life force is going to be drained over time to heal the Necromancer. So this is going to create kind of like an interesting dynamic in how you're going to play the game, being able to build up enough life force to enter Shroud, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're avoiding enough damage so that it doesn't actually drain too much of that life force. And I mean, you still get the upside of the heal, but a lot of the time you're going to be wanting to go into that Shroud and get access to those damaging abilities. So it's kind of, right off the bat, kind of an interesting change of pace for this character. And there's a lot more to come. And let's just give myself some more life force here. And first thing we're going to see when we hop into Shroud, we're starting to accumulate this, this mechanic called Blight. And we'll see a little bit more of this on the rest of the spec as well. But building up Blight, you can see on the health orb, we're gaining negative health. This is temporary health, 2% per stack. This stacks up to 25 times, so you can lose up to 50% of your maximum health if you are capped on Blight. And the trade-off there is that some of the traits on this character are going to reward you for accumulating a lot of Blight, and that's going to create kind of this high-risk, high-reward dynamic for this character, which is more of a glassy DPS character, even more so than Reaper. We're going to see a couple other mechanics with the Shroud that really reinforce that. Looking to make this more of a high DPS, a little more mobility than Necromancer is used to. We'll get to that as we get into the Shroud skills. So Blight, key mechanic, we'll see that in Elixirs as well. The other thing to note about Harbinger Shroud is that Life Force will not actually protect you. It will not absorb damage while you're in Shroud. You are just going to take full damage from abilities against your health total. So this, again, makes the character a little bit more squishy, but at the same time it also gives you more access to Life Force because you can't actually be pushed out through damage eating through all your Life Force. You're going to have access to Shroud as long as you have Life Force. Obviously, you'll be accumulating Blight as that goes on, and you're going to be susceptible to damage. So really big moment of high risk, high reward again. And since you're able to take damage, you're also allowed to be healed. So it's a pretty big disconnect from the typical Shroud we see on Core Necro, we see on Reaper. Kind of similar to Scourge in that sense, where you always kind of have access to incoming healing and at the same time don't have that massive protection from Life Force. Scourge makes up for it with some barrier. Harbinger just has to deal with it. Get some allies to heal you, get some supports, make some support friends, and really be able to capitalize on the upside of Harbinger Shroud. So that kind of creates a few different ways that you can interact with Shroud here, because the longer you stay in Shroud, you're going to be accumulating blights. You're even more and more susceptible to damage. So sometimes you might want to just pop in, use all your abilities, which we will cover very shortly, but we just show off super high level. Here's some buttons to press. So you might pop in, use all your abilities, pop out, and really minimize the blight. Then you're giving up some of the sustained pressure from the damaging abilities in Harbinger Shroud, but at the same time you're kind of maximizing your survivability by accumulating less blight. Or you can have that kind of trade-off where going in with maximum health or maximum life force is going to give you access to potentially 20 seconds of Shroud. This drains at 5% per second. So up to 20 seconds of Shroud where you're going to really have access to a lot of these powerful abilities. And just going to throw something out for all the theory crafters in the chat real quick. Everyone who has spreadsheets, we should probably compare notes sometime because I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. But for anyone who wants to do some calculations and maybe figure out the power coefficients of all these abilities before getting your hands on it next Tuesday, the character I'm currently on has 2,023 power, as well as about 37% boon duration. So keep that in mind. Legendary pistol, sorry, getting ahead of myself. So keep that in mind. There's your weapon strength. There's your power. Figure out the power coefficient. Everyone out there with spreadsheets, big thumbs up. And so we'll be hovering over tooltips as we go in there. So let's take a look at the actual Shroud skills now. Starting off, we have Tainted Bolts. This is just auto attack. It's a little bit cooler than Life Blast. It's a little bit faster. Typical, I guess maybe a little closer to Reaper, which has the nice auto attack chain compared to the very deliberate Life Blast that Core Necro has access to. So this actually fires 2 different projectiles. So a little bit of extra value from Doomfire, for example, which we've already kind of preemptively reduced the burning duration of Doomfire for the Harbinger specialization because of this kind of dual hit on the auto attack. So a little bit of power damage, a little bit of torment in there, and all the lovely procs of Shroud Skill 1 that everyone knows and loves. Moving on to Dark Barrage. This is kind of the primary damage. I'm going to have to keep resetting my Shroud over and over and over, but that's fine. This is kind of the primary damage payoff for the kit. This is a high power coefficient, a lot of torment. This is more of that shotgun style, point blank projectile that we see on stuff like Split Blade. We see it on Fan of Fire. A lot of skills have this kind of value for being closer in range. You see, moving back, you're not going to get full all 6 hits on these projectiles, but you still get a little bit of damage. It's going to be optimal to be in melee range, and we're going to see the opportunity to get in melee range with some of the other skills on this kit. Moving on to both Devouring Cut and Voracious Arc. These are both movement abilities. So Reaper gets the 1 dash on skill 2. Harbinger gets a little bit more. We got 2 movement skills in here. That dash is actually really long. That's great. So Devouring Cut, it's more that burning speed, no evade here. We put the evade on Voracious Arc. We don't want to overload that too much. Necro still trying to be a little bit of this squishier character. Don't want to put too many evades in there, but giving it access to a little bit more movement is going to allow you to both get in and set up your Dark Barrage, or kind of disengage and get back into range for your pistol abilities. So Devouring Cut, damage and torment, pretty straightforward. Voracious Arc, this one has the evade. This is the vault animation that we've seen before on Daredevil. This is also going to have a very, very short daze. So this is kind of your main engage tool. This is going to set you up, get a short daze, maybe interrupt something, give you a very short window of opportunity to kind of capitalize on what you're trying to do, really fire off the Dark Barrage. And then finally, we're going to see the big CC Vital Draw on skill 5. Not uncommon for Necro to have a CC skill on skill 5. We've seen it with Executioner's Scythe on Reaper and Tainted Shackles on Necro, or Core Necro. Vital Draw, probably the most powerful. We have like 3-second float. This also gives you a little bit of life force as well, so that kind of gives you a little bit more time in here if you're hitting maximum number of targets. This is a AoE 3-second float, so really big potential to set up Dark Barrage, set up pistol skills, you know, hit this, Dark Barrage, get out, press skill 2, Weeping Shots. We'll get to that real quick. You have a lot of opportunity to set up both yourself and your teammate with that ability. So there's definitely a lot of power in the Harbinger kit. We're trying to really balance the risk-reward aspect of no health coverage with life force and also the just increasing blight mechanic, and trying to make sure that the Harbinger Shroud kit is strong enough to really warrant that. And we'll see how that actually ends up playing out once you guys get your hands on this in the beta. So next, let's hop into the pistol kit. This is kind of a ranged, it's kind of like a hybrid DPS weapon. You can play it with either power or condition, or potentially both. Maybe Grieving is a solid stat combination there. Carrion, Rabid, these, maybe not as much Rabid, but Carrion's a solid stat combination there. But looking at Vicious Shot, pretty standard auto attack, 2 bounce. So line up 2 targets, you're going to get a little bit of extra value there. Damage, Torment, nothing too crazy, but it's an auto attack. We want to make sure it's kind of pretty basic. And moving on to Weeping Shots, the 2 skill. We showed this a little bit off of the Vital Draw. This is kind of this is probably the strongest, or maybe not the strongest, because the 3 skill is also pretty good, but this Weeping Shots does a lot of things. It's going to do damage, vulnerability, torment, life force. This also pierces, so if you line up a good number of targets, you can get a pretty significant amount of AoE damage. This is obviously a little bit harder to do in a competitive setting where the enemies aren't going to stack as cleanly on top of each other for a line projectile, but if you get that perfect line, then you're looking at potentially a lot of life force, a lot of damage. And the life force is only going to be once per bullet. We didn't want to overblow it too much on one skill, so this is only going to be up to 9% if you land all 6 of those shots on any target. Piercing, not going to give you any additional value. It's only the first target strike that gives you life force. But we'll see a bit more life force generation on the rest of the kit as well. Moving on to Bioblast, skill 3. This is another pretty strong skill. The whole kit here on the pistol is quite good. Gives you a little bit more AoE than some of the other Necromancer weapons, looking at Axe and Scepter, for example. They each have like a singular AoE skill, but Pistol has the opportunity to kind of get AoE value out of both 2 and 3, and a little bit on the Bouncing Projectile with skill 1. So just looking over Bioblast here, this is an AoE stun, short duration stun, 1 second. This is more intended to be like that disruptive value as opposed to the major crowd control setup. That's more what Vital Draw is trying to do out of the Shroud kit. But this is also going to do weakness and poison and some life force generation. So not quite enough to set up the entire combo from Weeping Shots, but if you have quickness, you should be able to get all those shots in there. And we'll actually see a little bit of quickness, and a non-trivial amount of quickness as we move into the elixirs and some of the traits. So maybe that's something that you can pull off more often. So that's the pistol kit. You know, it's 900 range, pretty standard for these Necromancer range weapons. And let's hop into the elixir skills next. So elixirs, skill type we've seen before in Engineer. This is, we're going to see a lot of boons. We're going to see a lot of blight. And so by putting blight onto all of these elixirs, it kind of gives us the ability to push them a bit more above rate in terms of what amount of boons they're going to give, because they're also going to have that downside of negative overall health. So Elixir of Promise, pretty straightforward. It's the heal skill. It just gives you vigor and healing and life force and a little bit of blight. And then we'll get to a few more exciting skills here. Elixir of Risk, 10 might stacks and Fury, more of that offensive option. And then combine that with Elixir of Anguish. This is going to be first source of quickness that we see here. Getting some notes on the, it's a good call, take a drink. Anyone who knows me knows that I can ramble about this game for a very, very long time. So we're definitely going to have a bit of that. Thank you. Anyway, Elixir of Anguish. This is first source of quickness that we're seeing in this kit. Also gives you a little bit of swiftness. Who cares about that? Quickness is the awesome thing here. Well, you know, you run a little bit faster. That's fine. That's fine. Everyone sees quickness, and that's what you want to see here. So, you know, you can pop Elixir of Anguish, Elixir of Risk. That's a lot. Quickness, Might, Fury, big damage potential. We'll see a little bit more coming in from the elite skill once we get there as well, which is going to be very exciting. Moving on to Elixir of Bliss. This is another life force source, so this is going to convert conditions into life force. Removes 5 condies, a little bit of resolution on top in case you have more condies on you then. It's going to reduce some of that damage. The primary value here is the condi cleanse and the life force generation, but it's an elixir, so it should probably apply blue. Let's put resolution, why not? One more utility skill to get to before we get to that elite. And this is the stun break of the kit, Elixir of Ignorance. Stun break resistance. Nothing too crazy, but 25 seconds. We'll see the CDR trait in cooldown reduction trait in the trait line once we get there. So this is potentially a pretty low cooldown, so at the cost of a little bit of blight, you have access to a pretty reasonable stun break option here. And finally, we are going to see, what is the name of the skill again? Elixir of Ambition. Super long tooltip. This applies to every boon in the game, 25 might. This skill is super powerful, but at the same time, we're looking at 10 stacks of blight. So this is minus 20% maximum health. And you know, the durations are things that we're going to be looking to tune. Some of these have been adjusted for competitive modes already. We've seen the strength of abilities that apply a large quantity of boons, and we want to make sure that this skill feels very powerful, but at the same time, to justify the trade-off of blight. So maybe going a little bit crazy to start it out, but you know, that's what betas are for. We want to see really how some of these things play out, some of the mechanics that are a little bit less known, like Harbinger Shroud is a very unique take on how Necromancer plays. So it'll be really exciting to see how that actually plays out once everyone gets their hands on it. So let's hop into the traits next. We're going to see a few different potential build lines, I guess, more incentives to build toward more power damage or more condition damage, because the pistol can kind of support both, Harbinger Shroud can kind of support both. We're also going to see a little bit of a potential boon support option for the Harbinger, which is something that Necro hasn't really had access to before. Scourge dipped its toe a little bit into that support role, more on the barrier side, and a little bit of might, a little bit of Condi Cleanse in there. Harbinger's really leaning into the boon aspect with their elixirs. And so maybe some of you can deduce what one of the traits is going to be based off, you know, boon support, elixirs give boons. I wonder what's going to be there. We'll get to that pretty soon. Well, let's start out with the minor traits. Alchemic Vigor, increased vitality. Why not? This is great. Necro loves vitality, more life force, more health. It's going to give you more access to Harbinger Shroud and a little bit more upfront bulk. So nothing too crazy, but minor trait. We want to make sure it feels solid without being kind of overbearing. And then on the Grandmaster side, we have Corrupted Talent, gain life force when entering Harbinger Shroud. This is going to guarantee that you have a little bit more, as we saw earlier with the life force draining to heal you while you're in combat. You're going to have a little bit of that push-pull of trying to build up enough life force to actually get a solid shroud off. So Corrupted Talent's going to give you a little bit more up front. And what this also allows is you're going to see that you can enter Harbinger Shroud with no life force because this trait is going to give you a little bit up front. So it's going to be a very, very short duration there. But if you do need the emergency to access either Vital Draw or any of the mobility skills, that is always going to be available with Corrupted Talent. So then hopping into the adept traits. Starting on the top, we're going to see a lot of power damage on the top row of traits, a little condition damage on the bottom line, and a lot of boon-related things or elixir-related things in the center line. So Wicked Corruption and Septic Corruption, these both are the blight payoffs, looking at 1%. I believe this is 0.5% in PvP and World v World, because this goes up to 25%. Very, very large number to see in the adept trait slot for a damage multiplier, but this is that damage real payoff for extending your Harbinger Shroud and putting as much blight in yourself as possible. You get a really big payoff here. Septic Corruption with the slight addition of also making Shroud Skill 2 apply poison, so that's up to 6 poison stacks if you hit all 6 of those projectiles. And in the middle here we have Vials, and I pronounced it perfectly on the first time this time. And this is the Elixir cooldown reduction. This one doesn't do anything particular with boons, but this is going to be a little bit more disruptive. Get that slow invulnerability on nearby enemies when you use an elixir. Moving into the master tier of traits, we have Implacable Foe, Stability on Harbinger Shroud. So this Foot in the Grave used to do this for all Necros, doesn't exist anymore. Harbinger seems like a solid spot to give a little bit of stability back on Shroud. Reaper has it on their skill 3, so giving Harbinger access on a trait really kind of enables that more diving, deep melee playstyle of get into Harbinger Shroud, get some stability, dive in, use my abilities, and then potentially get out or just try to survive outside of that. This also gives you a little bit more ferocity based off vitality for that, just a little bit of extra power damage. Down on the bottom, we're going to see pistol cooldown reduction. So this is actually something you could take regardless of build, but there's also the expertise vitality conversion to kind of incentivize condition builds a little bit more, but obviously anyone who's going to be using the pistol might see this as a viable trait, get more life force generation from 2 and 3, more stuns, just more access to those pistol skills. This could definitely slot into any kind of build. Then here in the middle, here is kind of the boon support payoff of the elixirs. Elixirs are now AoE, and a little bit of concentration on top. So this is something we've seen before, like Soul Beast stance share, and stuff like that. So looking at, I mean, obviously Elixir of Ambition is the huge payoff here. If I come over to these golems that are my good friends, I can give them every boon in the game, and the blight is not shared, so this is me taking on a little bit of blight and giving a giant pile of boons to all of my allies. This is a super powerful trait. Like we see with the Soul Beast stance share, we see some duration reductions. This is just 100%. Everyone gets the full amount. This is definitely something that could come down in the future if it turns out to be too powerful, but we really want to see how this plays as we're trying to really enable Necromancer to be kind of this boon support character with Harbinger as something that it hasn't really done a whole lot of before. And I'll take a quick water break before hopping into the Grandmaster traits. All right, so Grandmaster traits. We're going to see kind of a common theme, common mechanical theme between the three of them, but they're all going to be, again, more in those power condition or boon duration type, boon support type of builds, rather. Starting with Cascading Corruption. This just gives you a little power up front, and also it's going to create this area effect around you while in Harbinger Shroud that deals power damage and a little bit of cripple. So this is really another reward for staying in Shroud for a long amount of time. You're going to get this continual damage pulses. Excuse me. Continual damage pulses to just get a little bit of extra pressure, reward you for building up this blight, staying in this Shroud for a long time. And we're going to see similar mechanic on the condition damage side of things. A little bit of condition damage up front, and this is going to pulse Torment and Weakness instead of, and I am in combat, unlucky. Yeah, so Torment and Weakness as opposed to a little bit of power damage and cripple. Hop back in here and show the Torment and Weakness. Very exciting. And finally, we're going to have the boon support. Grandmaster trait is going to be a pulsing AoE quickness. So this is for yourself and nearby allies. We've seen a little bit of this on Reaper where they have that pulsing quickness for themselves. This one's a little bit less uptime overall, but it's going to be AoE, and obviously you can spec a lot more into boon duration on this character if this is the type of gameplay that you're looking for. So very, very powerful option. All of these Grandmaster traits just really reward you for being in Shroud for a long time and really pushing that risk-reward side of the Harbinger kit. So that's all we've got to show off for the Harbinger here. Obviously there's a lot more to dive into in terms of like gameplay and rotations and all that good stuff. But we don't want to spoil everything here. We show off all the skills, show off all the traits. Once you guys get your hands on it on Tuesday, you'll be able to deep dive into all that stuff and really start figuring things out. So I believe next we're going to hop over and talk a little bit about the Virtuoso.
The
The Virtuoso sharpens the power of their mind into deadly psionic blades. Unlike traditional mesmer illusions, they wield these directly as magic projectiles. They deftly manipulate, deploy, and restore their summoned blades throughout a battle, staggering their enemies with conditions and control while inflicting very real cuts. If a Virtuoso ever finds their stock of magic blades running low, they can always count on the solid forged dagger in their hand.
All right, so Indigo, why don't you start us off with the Virtuoso's lore?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a mesmer main, the Virtuoso is very near and dear to my heart, and I will say that as many times as I have to. I love mesmer. I love how punishing and really unique the gameplay feels for it. And the Virtuoso is a really fun take on the class, and I'm really excited to go into it a little bit more today. Cantha is an ancient nation filled with culture, and what you get with that kind of age is tradition and heritage, and their combat and warfare is really no different. And the mesmer is kind of the embodiment of those themes. At the monasteries in Xingjie, they've learned to channel all of their telekinetic powers into their main hand dagger, their new weapon. And instead of producing clones, they now use all of that energy to create blades to aid them in battle. And the effect is very cool and really mysterious and very, very deadly. And Carl did a really great first introduction, but I know, Ruby, we were going to go into that again more.
Yeah, so you all first saw the Virtuoso back on July 27th during our End of Dragons First Look event. Carl did that walkthrough and showed some of what the Virtuoso is all about. So before Cal expands on that, we're going to give you a refresher with Carl's walkthrough.
Hi everyone, I'm Carl McLean, a senior combat designer working on Elite Specializations for End of Dragons. We're here today to preview some of the abilities for the upcoming Mesmer Elite Specialization, the Virtuoso. Let's jump right into it. To begin, let's briefly cover the profession mechanic changes. From the start, you will no longer have access to clones. Instead of creating clones, the Virtuoso will stock a blade on themselves for use with their Bladesong profession abilities. Phantasms will still initialize, but will stock a blade instead of creating a clone when they finish with their action. We'll have some brief demonstrations of different ways to gain blades during this preview. Now, let's go look at the Virtuoso's weapon, the dagger. The first skill for the Virtuoso's dagger is a consistent projectile attack called Flying Cutter. Instead of a payout of a 3 auto attack chain, any target struck by 3 of the projectiles it launches will receive multiple additional attacks on the 3rd impact. The second skill of this weapon is Blade Call. This ability spreads daggers which pause at their ending point or wherever they collide with terrain, and then return to the Virtuoso for a second attack. If the blades strike an enemy during this ability, you'll stock a blade for your profession abilities. Here you can see a blade stocked above my character's left shoulder. Then stocking a second blade shows another above my right shoulder. Unstable Bladestorm is the third ability, dealing pulsing damage along its path and hurling blades at enemies within its reach. Okay, let's use some of these stocked blades we've accumulated. Bladesong Harmony is the Virtuoso's most accessible bladesong, expending each stocked blade separately over a period of time that deals damage to your target enemy. Bladesong Sorrow. Each of your stocked blades readies itself, then launches toward your targeted enemy to strike them simultaneously, while inflicting confusion. We'll rebuild a few of our blades after this by switching to a greatsword, then using Mirror Blade and Phantasmal Berserker. Bladesong Dissonance. Combine all your blades into a single strike that dazes enemies. We'll regain a full set of blades by using the utility skill Blade Renewal. Blade Turn Requiem will block for a short time and deal damage to nearby enemies based on the number of blades stocked. Your heal skill is called Twin Blade Restoration, which throws daggers at enemies and grants bonus effects if you hit foes with them. As covered before, Blade Renewal will grant distortion and fully stock all blades that can be used differently for each of the Blade songs. Rain of Blades drops daggers on foes for its duration, punishing enemies that remain in its area. Sword of Decimation is a single impact in an area to strategically immobilize enemies. Psychic Force is an area attack around the Virtuoso that pushes enemies away. And finally, 1000 Cuts as your elite skill is a fire and forget line-based damaging ability that requires foes to stay in its narrow path for full effectiveness. So there you have each of the abilities that the Virtuoso can harness for the expansion. We'll cover the traits another time. We're excited to see how the daggers fly when you get your hands on this burly elite specialization. I've been Carl McLean, and on behalf of ArenaNet and the Skills team, thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
All right, so thank you for that, Carl. And let's go back to Cal and expand on what the Virtuoso is all about.
Yeah, so Carl gave a great preview. There's a few more things we want to touch on. Obviously, we have the traits to go over. There's a little bit to touch on the profession mechanic, a little bit to talk about in the dagger skills. So let's just hop into it. For all the theory crafters out here, this character has 2,120 power, so keeping you guys on your feet, it's a little bit different. So keep that in mind when looking at skill facts. So the one kind of important note here that I don't believe Carl mentioned in the video is that we're going to see the blade mechanic is again very different from clones. Clones are kind of tied to a target, they kind of dissipate when you leave. Blades are not going to have that same problem. You're going to be able to carry them with you as you move between fights. So I'm just going to run all the way out here and eventually get out of combat, and we're going to see that I still maintain 5 blades. So this is kind of really going to shift the possibilities for Mesmer, who is typically used to, you get into combat and you need to build up some clones to get that maximum shatter damage. But here's an opportunity to have those already in place from maybe a different fighter. You just build them up while you're running around, and then you can just hop into a fight already 5 blades stocked and fire off maximum damage shatter. So that's a pretty interesting thing. I'm just going to hover some tool tips real quick. Carl went over all these, but again, we actually have the power number here, so get out your spreadsheets and calculate these power coefficients. I won't stay too long. You guys can catch it in the VOD because we've already talked about these skills. I do have one more trick to show on Blade Call. Carl talked about how Blade Call, it's kind of that boomerang projectile. It comes back when it hits a wall. So if you're right next to a wall, then you have that much quicker return time. It's a little bit more difficult to avoid or more easy to confirm all of your damage. If you don't have a wall handy, the ground's also pretty close to a wall, so you can just detarget, throw these into the ground, and that's going to really speed up the return time of this ability. Much more realistic to confirm that off of a crowd control, either from yourself or a teammate. This is going to make you just that much more likely to maximize your blade call damage if you feel the need to. So I think I caught all these tool tips. If not, there you go. Real half-second durations. Get to that print screen APM going. And hover some more tooltips over here. I believe we missed the tooltip for the stun break here, Psychic Force as well. This is that powerful knockback cooldown that Carl showed. Might Fury, this is also the stun break. So a little bit higher cooldown, but this is a pretty powerful kind of potentially fight shifting, break a stun and set up myself with the CC as well. Pretty powerful skill. That is the stun break of the kit. And I believe we have one more utility in here to get a power coefficient on. There it is, Sword of Decimation. And 1000 Cuts, of course. So outside of that, let's hop into the traits. These were totally done before the video. Some people speculated the traits weren't done yet, that's why we didn't show them. That's not true. We just, I don't even know what the reason is why we didn't show these before, but the traits were totally already prepared. So let's just run through the minors real quick. We're going to see Deadly Blades. Blade skills inflict vulnerability on critical hit. So similar to the Harbinger, we're going to see a few different possible playstyles for the Virtuoso that are kind of outlined through in the traits. We're going to see the possibility to see power damage or condition damage, and alternatively a little bit of more utility-focused traits. Deadly Blades kicks it off as kind of this trait that can slot into any build. Blades inflict vulnerability. So this is referring to any skill that has the Blade skill fact, Flying Cutter, Blade Call, Unstable Bladestorm. There's a lot of them. But any of these skills, as they fire blades, they are going to trigger that trigger that trait as long as you critically hit. We'll see a little bit more of that on one of the adept traits as well. And moving into Quiet Intensity in the Grandmaster slot, this is kind of that super fury that we've seen in a few places, a few different variations across different professions. We see a Roiling Mist on Revenant, Vicious Quarry on Ranger, kind of this enhanced fury. So Mesmer is getting the 30% critical hit fury, as well as a little bit of extra ferocity to really push that power damage. And we'll see a bit more. Sorry?
Do you need some water?
I'm way ahead of you. We've stocked back up on water, so.
Yeah, I don't know if you have enough water.
We'll see how many of these I can get through during the stream.
Oh no!
So moving back to the adept traits, you're going to start in the middle because middle trait line is a little bit more power focused. Bottom trait line is going to be a little bit more condition focused. And then we'll see a bit more utility on the top. So let's just start with the power. Mental focus, strike damage increase against foes within the range threshold. So a little bit of a difference. The dagger kit is obviously 1200 range, and this gives you a damage bonus for being within 600 range. So slight disconnect, but it's more pushing that more. You get more value out of the dagger skills by being closer, right? Like Blade Call, you get the full shotgun effect of that triple projectile. Unstable Bladestorm, a little bit slower of that moving projectile. So being closer is already a little bit more valuable for this character, and we're just going to reward that with Mental Focus being that close range damage multiplier. And here on the bottom we see a bit more condition focused. Jagged Mind, Blade Attacks increase. Blade Attacks inflict bleeding on critical hits. So similar, Vuln on crit on the Master Tier Minor, Bleed on crit here in Jagged Mind. This is any blade skill. So this really opens the door for a condition damage build because we saw all those blade skill facts across different skills. This is going to be potentially a lot of bleeding application. And finally up top we have Blade Turn Refrain. Blade Songs grant Aegis. So really powerful Aegis on Profession mechanic. Like this would be very, very good on Core Mesmer with the instant shatters. A little bit less powerful on Virtuoso as you do have the cast time. It's going to be a little bit harder to react maybe to something like Arcing Slice or Maul or these big incoming damage skills. But if you time it really well, you could still get that Aegis, or it's going to just enable you to kind of keep going, mitigate the next attack after you fire off one of those Blade Songs. And the Aegis is also going to be a little bit more valuable as we look at some of the traits further down the line, as we'll care about blocking attacks. So pretty valuable trait there, if not as powerful as it could have been on Core Mesmer. Hopping into the Master Tier, I'm going to start with the power damage again. Phantasmal Blades. Common theme among these traits is you're going to see Fury. All three of them are going to grant you access to Fury, which plays into that Grandmaster Minor, giving you the kind of super Fury enhancement. So Phantasmal Blades, Phantasm give you Fury, and also Launch a Blade. This one's a little bit tricky for all you theory crafters because I believe it uses the Phantasm weapon strength for this skill fact, so have fun finding that one. Because I believe all the Phantasms actually have different weapon strengths. I was testing this a long time ago, and I noticed some different weapon strengths among different Phantasms, so that's a fun one. On the bottom here for our condition damage players, Sharpening Sorrow, Fury on Bladesong Sorrow, that is the Cry of Frustration replacement. So a little bit of Fury off of that, a little bit expertise, condition damage, Rejoice. And then back up top we have Duelist Reversal. So pretty powerful option here, giving you quickness and Fury, again Fury, but quickness, big neon sign around quickness probably. Blocking or dodging attacks. This plays really well with Blade Turn Refrain. Getting that Aegis, obviously anytime you dodge. Get access to quickness, potentially a lot of quickness uptime because you have access to a lot of blocks, a lot of Aegis, a lot of dodges. 2 dodges on this character, that's crazy. Why do we ever give Mesmer 2 dodges? So Duelist Reversal, playing against this character, if you know they have that trait equipped, maybe you want to front load your abilities a little bit more, push through that cooldown, force them to dodge multiple times within that 3 seconds. You're only going to get the single quickness application there, but quite powerful. Then we're almost done believe, yeah, I covered all those, so we'll move into the Grandmaster traits here in a second. So we're going to see another common theme amongst all three Grandmaster traits is that they're all going to be pushing that blade generation or clone generation that Mesmer really wants to see, and especially Virtuoso, as we've increased the cap up to 5, really looking for even more access to clones or blades in order to push those kind of full power shatters. Starting off up top, we're seeing Psychic Riposte. Block or dodge is going to stock a blade. So this, and something we're going to see here is that these are probably a little bit above rate again to some of the other clone generation traits that you see on core Mesmer. Compare this to something like Deceptive Evasion, where on dodge you get a clone. Obviously that one doesn't need to actually successfully dodge an attack, but every dodge gives you a clone with Deceptive Evasion. Psychic Riposte, you get dodging an attack or blocking an attack, so quite a bit of clone generation is possible with Psychic Riposte. You also get a little extra blade throw in there, get some trait triggers, why not? But I think the big value of this trait is going to be the amount of blades that you can potentially generate, especially looking at traits like Blade Turn Refrain, looking at the block coming out from Blade Turn Requiem, and obviously just dodging well. As long as you're dodging attacks, you're going to be able to generate a lot of blades. And you can also just run Deceptive Evasion with this as well, generate multiple blades per dodge. Really powerful option. This is going to potentially create a lot of shatter potential for this character, or blade song potential. Why not? Interchangeable. I'm going to say clone every time. I'm going to say shatter every time. Blade turns, clones, blade songs. It's all very confusing, but it's all mechanically, we all know what we're talking about here. Then moving into the middle, we have Infinite Forge. So this one is a little bit less bursty. This is more of like a more sustained clone generation trait. Over time, just being in combat, you are going to be able to build up some amount of blades. This is every 3 seconds up to a threshold. So there's a little bit of play here where you're not going to be able to immediately burst up to 5, you're not going to be able to burst up to 3, or if you are doing that with other sources, you're going to lose some of the value from Infinite Forge. But if you're looking for more of that deliberate, a little bit slower paced, really just maximizing your clone generation, as you sit here with Infinite Forge building up clones, you're going to have access to the ability to shatter pretty frequently for a solid amount, and you can also stack, like bring in your decoy, your mirror images. Once you get up to that 3 threshold, burst up to 5, fire off your blade song, and get a lot of value off of that. Then finally, leaning more into the condition damage builds, Blood Song here, increased bleed damage, just a nice little bonus on top. This is also going to give you a blade whenever you stack 5 bleeding on a single target. So this is all sourced from the Mesmer. Applying a bleed to a target with 4 bleed stacks from someone else, not going to do anything for you. Probably a little bit more balanced that way. And but this is, again, this is something that's going to be able to generate potentially a lot of clones in a short amount of time, because if you're hitting a bunch of targets and applying a lot of bleeds potentially with, you know, Jagged Mind or some of the other sources that Mesmer has access to, you could potentially be hitting like 5 targets, applying 5 bleeding, and getting a pile of blades to then shatter with. So again, all these Grandmaster traits are pretty powerful, I feel like, in terms of the amount of clones that you can build up compared to some of the more standard Mesmer gameplay. We're definitely going to be keeping an eye on how strong all of them are as people play with them a lot more. But we really wanted to push Virtuoso a lot toward that ability to really push those shatters with the 5 cap and the kind of unique differences of the characters already pointing your eyes toward the shatter mechanic. So let's give a lot of access to blades to this character. And so that's all we got to cover for the Virtuoso here, and we got one more specialization to talk about, which is the Willbender.
Willbenders protect the Canthan throne with unflinching loyalty. They have no time to play at war. If a threat emerges, they'll strike it down before it has time to react. They take the fight to their targets, using rapid movement skills to navigate the battlefield. A Willbender's blade work is unmatched, and wielding a sword in their offhand gives them extra opportunities for ruthless cuts.
All right, so those of you who guessed Guardian Elite Specialization during our teaser last week, congratulations. And one note, something that I'm really enjoying is how closely to Cantha the lore is all tied. So why don't you run us through the last Elite Specialization today and that lore?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Willbender is actually really exciting on that note specifically because it gave us an opportunity to not just dive into the lore, but to dive into the lore of ancient Cantha, even predating what we knew from factions. So Willbenders are traditionally protectors of the Emperor of Cantha, or the throne of Cantha, more specifically Empresses too. And more specifically to that, they were protectors of the Wei no Su, or to be closer to the stars, which were certain emperors and empresses that had achieved ascension through celestial trials. So they're mildly important and probably shouldn't be killed. So Willbenders are really, really potent protectors, and which goes along with the Guardian class as a whole. But like the Harbinger, they're kind of a tonal breakaway from what we're used to. They're definitely still protectors, but in their gameplay, they're a little bit more brutal. And with their new offhand sword, their whole thing, they're kind of like more of like an assassin, like a right hand to the throne, or the throne's sword hand, more specifically. And their whole MO is that they get in there quickly. They're the first one to strike. And I'm really excited for everybody to dig into that a little bit more with Cal, because it's one of the more unique takes on a class that we're very familiar with.
Thanks, Indigo.
Let's do that now.
We
can go.
Yeah, so Willbender, super zoomy, fast Guardian. We saw a little bit on the featurette, a lot of mobility. We'll be really diving into that, but really pushing that more assassin-y, roamer, kind of skirmisher playstyle. I mean, we've seen the similar silhouette with like Sword Revenant heavy armor, with that similar high mobility playstyle. Warrior maybe a little bit slower with their offhand sword. But Guardian is really going to be pushing, again, toward that more melee brawler, kind of glassier again, high mobility, a little bit disconnected from the usual deliberate, slow movements that we see with the Guardian profession. And for all of the spreadsheeters out there, this character has 2,189 power, so all three of them are different. That's just how the default loadouts turned out. I'm going to go complain about that to somebody after this. But keep that in mind when we're running through skill facts. But first, before we get into the sword, let's talk about the profession mechanic a little bit. So we're going to see something pretty different from the kind of typical virtues that Guardian has. We're very used to these passives that are just always there, and then you're going to activate the virtue, and it's going to have like a singular upfront effect. But the Willbender virtues are quite different. There's actually no passive attached to these. There's only going to be kind of this active stance. I don't really want to call it a stance because we have a stance skill type and these are not stance skill types, but it's more of that style of play where you kind of enter justice stance and then your outgoing strikes are going to apply burning. So if I'm just hitting this guy, hitting these guys, see, no burning procs, but once I hop into justice here, we're going to then start accumulating the more understood justice gameplay. And we saw a little bit there on the ground. This is going to be something that we see across all of the different different virtues here. They all kind of have their own flavor of what we're calling Willbender flames. So here we have the kind of the triple claw on the ground. This is actually target controlled, so it can only hit one target even if you're standing on all three. The intent of the Willbender flames is less about damage and more about giving you additional strikes, because we're going to see similar mechanical behavior on both resolve and courage. That's a little bit different from what we're used to, but we're going to see that these Willbender flames really serve to provide a little bit more value to that style of gameplay. So we saw the claw with justice, resolve, we're going to have the little straight line, and courage. We'll come back to these skills again. We have the nice circular AoE radius. So a few different flavors of Willbender flames, just to really push a little bit of those extra strikes. And as we were talking about, this character is super fast, high mobility. All of these, all of the virtues are mobility skills. So we see a pretty decent range on justice, resolve in there, decent dash. This one's also an evade. And yeah, we can just talk about courage real quick. Courage is actually shadow step, pretty long range. initial hit, it's again pretty low damage on these strikes. They're more just intended to push the virtue triggers. So the actual trigger that we're going to see for Resolve is that instead of having that initial upfront heal that we see on like Core Resolve and Wings of Resolve, is that it's going to have the similar justice mechanic of every 5 strikes is going to heal you a little bit. So we'll just lose some health here real quick and be in combat, so that matters. So see that while we're in Justice, we're getting this, or in Resolve, sorry, we're seeing 652, pretty reasonable proc. You can actually get a lot of healing. Obviously I'm cleaving like 5 golems at a time. So maybe more in that WoWo environment, more in that open world, blobs of enemies. You're going to have a lot of opportunity to get a lot of potential healing here. Or if all your enemies stack up in PvP, maybe you can also do that. Probably a little bit harder to get as many multi-hits, but still a lot of healing potential from the Resolve virtue. Then moving into Courage, we have Crashing Courage. And the proc here is actually, again, a pretty powerful effect. The 5-hit trigger here is going to be both Aegis and Stability. So this is really enabling that kind of dive potential for the character. You're just going to, if you dive in with Courage, you're going to be able to, I didn't attack anything, probably a mistake. I recommend attacking things after you activate your virtues, because that's going to give you the extra, up to 12 stacks of stability. That's insane. But again, hitting multiple targets here, that's per 5 strikes, you're going to get Aegis, you're going to get stability. So really powerful cooldown to kind of give you a little bit more staying power in the fight. But one thing to keep in mind is that these stances, I'll just keep calling them stances, why not? These virtue stances all overwrite each other. So if you do if you fire off Justice and fire into Resolve immediately, you see that I now only have Resolve active. So this is going to create a little bit of decision making in terms of if you want to maximize your mobility or you want to maximize your virtue triggers. Because if you're looking to maximize virtue triggers, maybe your enemy is able to disengage after you dive in with Justice, they shadow step away and you actually need to chase them, so you can't really get full value out of your Justice, and you might need to continually chase after them, and then you're losing access to either Justice or Courage or Resolve. But on the upside, you have a lot of chase potential. You just go pretty far, throw in some movement from skill 5 on the sword, we'll talk about that real soon. So a lot of movement. There's even more movement on the utility skills that we will get to in a few moments here. So that's pretty much how the summary of the virtues. Pretty different from standard Guardian virtues, but I think it creates a really interesting kind of play style of really pushing that melee brawler character. All right, moving into the sword kit. So we have offhand sword, 2 skills here. I'm going to start out with Advancing Strike. This is the one I kind of showed off, movement skill. So it's just a dash if you don't have anything targeted. If you have something targeted, if you end up within a certain amount of range at the end of this dash, you are then going to do a final shadow step and attack. So a little bit of that rush, warrior greatsword rush, but a little bit more controlled with the shadow step. And then a nice slow and a very short immobilized 1 second. It's not intended to be like this major lockdown. We're going to see more of that coming out from the utility skills. We're going to see more of that on the elite skill, or there's more expectation that this character is going to be set up by their allies and as the assassin dive in and really secure the kill. So Advancing Strike, not going to be enough to fully confirm Executioner's Calling here, but if you can get a larger lockdown from either your allies or some of the utility side skills, you can land that. So taking a quick look at Executioner's Calling here, this is the main damage payoff of the sword offhand. Pretty big damage multiplier. We've got some vulnerability in there. Pretty straightforward skill. This is the multi-hit. You do the initial stab animation into the double swing. So you swing your sword and then you swing your swords again, and you get a solid amount of damage coming out from this skill. Yeah, so I mean that's all there's to the sword kit, 2 skills, but it's going to really lean into that mobility, damage, assassin-y type playstyle. And we're going to see a little bit more from the utility side of things, where you can kind of push a little bit more toward crowd control if you really want to, or push more on the mobility side if you want to, or just kind of push for damage if you want to. So moving on to the heal skill, Reversal of Fortune. Guild Wars 1 players probably recognize the name. Kind of an homage to that skill. We have a fairly similar mechanic, if not, it's not exactly the same, and the games are very different. We're not going to see exact one-to-one copies there. But what we're going to see with the Reversal of Fortune is it kind of has this similar full counter type mechanic where you are doing this initial block channel. And if you fail to block anything, you'll get a little bit of a heal here. Let me stay in combat so I don't randomly heal myself. But you're going to see, if you don't block anything, you get a very small heal, not very rewarding. That's totally by design, because the upside of this skill is if you actually block an attack, let's just have my golem friend use some fire grab or something. See, a bigger payoff there, that's about a 4k heal, so about double, but you're also seeing actually taking 0 damage from that ability, so fully absorbing the damage from the incoming attack and getting a heal on top of that. Really, really high upside for this skill, because obviously if you're going to block something like Maul or Kill Shot or these heavy damaging attacks, you're effectively gaining tens of thousands of health in combination with the 4,264 of this skill. So pretty high upside, and it's definitely going to be kind of a key gameplay moment playing against this character, because you're going to want to make sure you don't trigger that Reversal of Fortune and really limit their options and reduce their healing. All right, let's move into some of the utility skills. We have the physical skill type, which is something we've seen in the past on Core Warrior. We've seen it on Daredevil. We're going to see a lot of the same themes, a lot of crowd control, mobility, damage, a lot of the same themes on the Willbender, but kind of doing their own flavor of physical skills. Start off with Flash Combo, pretty powerful skill here. This is going to be using that kind of fist flurry mechanic that we saw on the Daredevil, where hitting all of these rapid strikes is going to unlock a secondary skill. In this case, it is a Shadow Return. So this is a super powerful cooldown, because if you jump in, land all these abilities, you then have a 6-second window to then fire off the rest of your kit. Just press all your buttons, why not? And then you can have that opportunity to then disengage and get out all in one skill, very strong. And at the same time, then we have the counterplay side of it, where if the Guardian hops in with Flash Combo, as long as you mitigate one of those, a single attack, then they're not going to be able to hop back out. So we see this golem has Aegis. I'm a terrible player, so I used my skill on a target with Aegis. Don't get my flip over Riposte, and now I'm just going to get destroyed by all these golems. Moving on, we move into Whirling Light. So this is basically, this is just a damage skill. This is a pretty solid damage skill. A little bit of weakness in there, but primarily we're looking at power damage, we're looking at burning. This is a super cool whirlwind kick animation, AoE, multiple strikes. So this also really plays well into the Virtues, which want those multi-hits. They want you to cleave multiple targets. We're seeing Whirling Light is a great opportunity to do both of those things while also doing a good amount of damage. And as a side effect of this, a kind of bonus effect of this skill, is that it's also a little bit of a movement skill, but you're primarily going to want to use it when you're already in melee range, because you're already starting these whirlwind kicks at the start of the ability. So using it to engage, you're losing access to the maximum damage potential of this skill. And if any of these golems ran away from me, you would see that there's a little bit of a chase movement component to this ability. Like when I use it far away, I move toward my target as long as I'm not already in range. So a little bit of chase down, but primarily a melee range AoE big damage ability. Next up we have Heal Crack. This one's pretty straightforward, damage and stun, 0.01 in PvP and World v World. Look forward to that. This one, this is kind of your combo off of Advancing Strike, because you get the 1 second immobilize here, that can guarantee Heal Crack, and then that can set up Executioner's, the full extent of Executioner's Calling there. So potentially, if you can find room for this skill on your bar, that gives you more personal opportunity to set up yourself instead of relying on allies and really unload all of your damage into a single target. And final thing, we might as well give this character a stun break. Glassy assassin characters probably want to break stuns every once in a while. So I'll just cover this super long skill fact while I take a drink of water. All right, so Whirling Light. Stun break, evade. This is kind of that similar like backwards roll mechanic we see in a lot of skills. Same thing. You do that flip over skill. I was going to touch on, there's also the blind, the initial blind. So get stunned, break a stun, roll away, apply blind, gives you a little bit of coverage to kind of re-engage on top, and we're just going to give you the re-engage on the same skill, quick retribution. This is a 3-second daze, single target though. I mean, you get a leap finisher in there, maybe there's a combo fail on the ground, get a little bit extra value, but 3-second daze, this is really going to allow you to potentially shift the momentum of the fight as you're breaking a stun, evading attacks, applying a blind, applying a daze on the comeback in, and then gives you another window of opportunity to really push forward with all of your damage. And finally, we're going to see the elite skill, Heaven's Palm. This is another powerful crowd control skill. A lot stronger than the 2-second stun we saw on the, what was this called? Heel crack? Yeah, heel kick, heel crack, same thing. Heaven's Palm, 4-second knockdown. This is a single target, but it's also going to do a kind of an area attack around you. So this will knock down your target and push everyone else away. So this is kind of trying to isolate your primary target, really enable that kind of assassin-y gameplay where I isolate the primary target, or isolate the priority target, and then unload my damage. 4-second knockdown, super long. I think only Backbreaker, someone's going to fact check me and destroy this, but I think Backbreaker is the only one that hits 4-second duration outside of any extensions. That's probably wrong, but why not? 4-second duration, very long. It's an elite skill. We were kind of talking earlier how this character not necessarily supposed to set themselves up as much. Elite skills are typically a spot that we tend to break or bend rules a little bit more, so this really kind of pushes that more crowd control option. Maybe you build a little bit tankier. You build, take heel crack, take Heaven's Palm, a little bit more of that disruptive brawler instead of the full glass cannon, the assassin. But Heaven's Palm, pretty strong cooldown in the elite slot. Then we're going to hop into the traits and talk about traits, because everyone loves traits. All right, so starting out with the minor traits. Right to sprint, mobility, super fast, guardian build. This makes sense. Let's get movement speed. Let's get some swiftness. Makes a lot of sense, fits the character thematically. We see this a lot on the master tier minor trait of elite specializations, where it is really just reinforcing kind of the character identity. Then moving in, some of you probably noticed I was getting stacks of a buff as we were firing off these virtues. That was lethal tempo. So this is the Grandmaster Minor damage bonus trait. And this is something kind of new and cool that we're doing on a handful of buffs with this set of elite specializations, where it's going to actually refresh the duration of itself every time you apply it. So that's a little bit different from the mechanics we see with like boons, where each stack of might is going to fall off independently as those durations expire. Lethal tempo, I get a stack of this, and then there's 1 second left on that stack, but I get a second stack. Now I have 2 stacks, both at full duration. And it's really trying to push kind of this natural build-up, this kind of building momentum aspect of this character, where initially you don't quite have your maximum potential, but assuming you stay in target, you stick to your targets, you do what this character is trying to do, you're going to build up lethal tempo and maintain lethal tempo and keep that damage bonus going. And it's pretty rewarding here. 3% per stack for 5 stacks, 15%, really good. We'll see a little bit of a bonus there in the Grandmaster slot once we get there. So pretty strong damage trait. Moving into the adept traits, we're going to see pretty similar theme across these traits, where they're all doing this more natural trade-off within the trait itself, where maybe giving above rate for the value of this slot than we usually do, but at the same time you're going to be giving something up. So looking here at Boon Pact, increased concentration, 240 concentration in the adept slot, pretty impressive, but at the same time allies will get reduced boons from you. So this is again pushing that really selfish, assassin-y playstyle for this character. If I want to extend my Fury durations from Monk's Focus, if I want more Resolution duration to keep up my crit chance from Righteous Instinct, maybe you go into Boon Pact. Probably not, because the next trait we're going to talk about is more just straight up power focused, but it's definitely an option if you're looking to just have a little bit more boon duration. Going to power for power, here you go. 240 power, minus 240 toughness. So pretty big trade-off there for a pretty big gain. This is pushing Guardian down pretty close into that light armor range. So bottom health, bottom armor-ish. It's feeling a little bit more like an elementalist, so you can enjoy going into the down state and pressing all your abilities there, as Ellie mains are all used to. But again, as long as you're, playing well, dodging your abilities, just dodge. 240 power in the add-up slot, pretty powerful trait. And finally, we have Conceited Curate here in the bottom trait line. Gives a little bit of healing power at the trade-off of not healing allies. This character doesn't really want to heal allies anyway, so it's just a bit more upside. 240 healing power, maybe not all that much. This could definitely be higher. We're definitely going to be, watching the data from the beta, watching all the feedback from the beta, seeing what's overtuned, what's undertuned. This is definitely something that could come up. Needs a little bit more of that selfish sustain, if that's the option you want to go to. This is the trait for you. So then let's move on to the master tier. I could just switch it up and go Grandmaster traits and throw everybody off, but that doesn't really make sense.
Told them your plan now, so.
So the first trait we're going to see in the master tier slot, Restorative Virtues. This is actually a really interesting trait, and it's really trying to push the mobility aspect of this character. Basically, what it says, while a virtue is active, activating another virtue reduces the initial virtue's cooldown time by its remaining duration. That's a lot of words, but what does it actually mean? So basically what it means is, if you're just kind of rapid firing your virtues, you're going to get refunded for the amount of time that you did not spend in that virtue stance, whatever you want to call it. So if I pop off Justice here, 6 seconds of Justice, but I immediately pop Resolve, you see a big cooldown refund on Justice there. And similarly, if we pop into Courage early, we're going to be getting some refund on Resolve. And so that is really going to really enable that kind of mobility playstyle, if that's something you're looking for, because you will be getting lower and lower cooldowns. We'll also see a little bit more of that in the Grandmaster slot for cooldown reduction. Moving on, Holy Reckoning. So this augments Willbender Flames, 33% damage increase. That's a really large number, but as I touched on earlier, Willbender Flames are not really something that we're intending to be kind of this main damage source anyway. So you're looking at 33% on top of a pretty small power coefficient already. It's not going to be doing a whole lot of value there. The main upside here is the healing per target struck. So you're going to look at this trait, and maybe in combination with Resolve. If you're hitting a lot of targets, we're going to see a lot of potential healing. I mean, the Courage AoE is probably the most easy to hit the most targets with, the big circle, but Resolve is also going to be giving you those Resolve procs at the same time. Obviously, all three of the virtues create Willbender Flames, which all heal you, so a bit more of sustain. This is going to be great in those larger fights where you're hitting multiple targets with these Willbender Flames. A lot of potential healing coming in from that trait. And finally, we're going to look at Vanguard Tactics. So this is a pretty powerful trait again. All these traits seem pretty strong, except for, Conceited Curate. We'll throw that one under the bus. It's a little bit on the weaker side, but a lot of good traits here in the Willbender kit. And Vanguard Tactics is kind of this two-pronged, multifaceted thing where up front it's going to just augment Courage, and Courage is going to give you protection and resolution on top of what it already does. We have a similar trait over in Virtues that gives protection on Courage, so those are going to add together. We're going to get a lot of potential protection duration if you take both of those together. But the kind of secondary component of this skill, or this trait rather, is that it gives you resistance on any shadow step. So we're looking at skills like Judge's Intervention, Symbol Blades. Guardian has a lot of shadow steps. We have even more shadow steps on the Willbender kit as well. So potentially a lot of resistance uptime. And this one is actually a trait that came to the party pretty late. This is more after the change we made to the resistance boon in the recent balance update, where previously resistance was, full condition immunity, and that's way too powerful an effect to put on such a repeatable source like on Shadow Step. But with the move to non-damaging conditions only, it's something that really fits this more assassin-y melee character playstyle, because you're going to be mitigating, ignoring cripple, immob, weakness, blind, like all these things that shut down melee characters so well. You're going to have access to resistance on your engage, assuming you blink in with either Courage or JI or any number of these shadow steps. And okay, you can just, chain them together, get more and more resistance. A lot of opportunity to really unload all of your damage while ignoring those non-damaging conditions. And almost done, so close, only 3 more traits to go and we're done with all the specs. So we'll get to them in a short minute here. All right, so common theme amongst Grandmaster traits or the Willbender is that they're all going to augment one of the virtues in their particular way. They're all pretty different, but they are all pretty powerful. Let's just throw out that word again, why not? Call everything powerful, and then when it's not powerful, you guys can all give me flack for it on forums or wherever you feel like doing that. Starting with Phoenix Protocol, this is going to be your resolve, augmenting resolve. So instead of the upfront heal on that passive trigger, you're instead going to get a little bit of regeneration, so heal over time, a little bit less valuable to this Glacier character. You'd rather have the upfront heal, but instead we're giving you regen and also then giving you Alacrity on top of that. So this is what leans more into that cooldown reduction type of gameplay, where we're going to see Resolve now giving me Alacrity. You can build up a lot of Alacrity, again, cleaving out a ton of targets here with a lot of multi-hit skills. You can get access to a lot of Alacrity, so that's going to reduce your Virtue cooldowns, it's going to reduce your damage cooldowns, it's going to reduce your crowd control cooldowns. It's going to enable you to kind of press more buttons, which I love pressing buttons, and I imagine a lot of players like pressing buttons too. So Alacrity, really valuable component given in exchange for trading that upfront heal for that slower over time regeneration. And the bonus note there is that resolve duration actually goes up a little bit as well. So increasing the duration and just giving you more and more resolve triggers. Next up we have Tyrant's Momentum. This is going to be the Justice Augment, 2-second duration increase. This also modifies lethal tempo, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So this, instead of 3% per stack, we're now looking at 5% per stack, but also a shorter duration. So this actually reduces lethal tempo from 6 seconds to 4. It's really going to require you to stick to those targets, keep hitting them, keep proccing your Justice, keep proccing your Resolve, keep proccing all your virtues, activating your virtues to make sure that lethal tempo keeps refreshing itself, keeps stacking up, really maximize your damage. And it also gives a little bit more opportunity for players to disengage or land a long CC to force the Guardian, force the Willbender out of that lethal tempo, lose all their stacks, and kind of give you that reprieve and a little bit of breathing room. And finally, we have Deathless Courage. We saved the craziest for last. I mean, it's not crazy, but it's a little bit crazy. Carl told me about this trait when he was building it, and I'm like, Carl, that's crazy. But we talked about it, and it's definitely an interesting trait. It's something we want to see how it plays. So I'll just hover this tooltip for a second while I snag some water, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. All right, so Deathless Courage. This augments your Courage virtue. And it says, as long as Courage is active, you cannot die. Your health cannot go below 1 HP. That is a pretty powerful effect. It does reduce the duration of Courage here, so we're seeing the 4-second Courage duration instead of the baseline 6. There's a little bit of a extending kind of momentum building opportunity here as well. For every player kill you get a couple of extra seconds there, up to 4 seconds duration, so you can get up to 8 seconds of this kind of no death mechanic if you are kind of chaining kills together. Otherwise it's going to be a 4 seconds, can't die, but this doesn't have the same kind of bailout heal that we see on like AED, which has the same mechanic. I can't die when I have AED, and it's going to heal me for a lot if I would die. Instead, this is just going to keep me at 1 HP, and I better get out of range before when Courage ends, or I'm just going to fall over because someone's going to touch me and I'm going to take 1 damage and go into the down state. So, I mean, this is something you're going to want to, this is something that's going to enable you to really dive in and, again, push all your buttons and then have an opportunity to get out. We saw a similar gameplay with Flash Combo into Riposte. We see a little bit more of that on Crashing Courage, that no death mechanic giving you that window of time to get your big damage abilities off and then get out or get sustained back up by your teammates to avoid just falling over when that ends. All right, so we made it through. That's a lot of skills, a lot of traits, a lot of tooltips. And that's all we have here for the Willbender. And that's all we have to cover for the elite specialization for this beta. So we're going to throw it back to Ruby to wrap up the stream here.
Yeah. Do you have enough water? Are you good? I feel like Cal is the real hero here.
Yeah.
Getting through all of that, so thank you.
I got through 2. Let's see. I don't think I can finish another one.
I have a few things to talk about, so let's see if you can get through. Oh, no, don't do that.
Yeah, just start
that seems dangerous. All right, so those are the first 3 elite specializations for End of Dragons. You're going to get to try them for yourself next week during the beta. All of the information on the beta event is on our website, but here's the quick rundown. The beta starts next Tuesday, the 17th at 9 a.m. Pacific time and runs until Saturday night, the 21st, until 10 p.m. Pacific time. This is open to all players with an account in good standing, including play for free players. When the beta event starts, you'll find 3 temporary beta character slots on your account where you can roll those characters. You can try one of each elite specialization if that's what you want. Those characters will be level 80 and fully geared up. While the End of Dragons maps are not part of this beta event, your beta characters can go through all game modes in the current live game, all maps, all waypoints are unlocked for you. Take them out for a spin, give them a try, play wherever you like in the live game, and let us know what you think. Saturday night, when the beta event ends, your characters and those character slots will go away, and game progress earned on those characters will not be saved. If you play on your regular characters during the beta event, that's fine, that will progress normally. So, I have a couple more things to talk about before we wrap up today. A few weeks ago, we partnered with DX Racer to give away a DX Racer Racing Pro gaming chair. We decided to celebrate the start of this beta event with another giveaway for a second chair. That went live a few hours ago. You can look on the Guild Wars 2 Twitter and see where and how to enter. And good, okay, now I'm doing it. And good luck to all of you who enter, and I hope the winner enjoys your chair. This is also the final week to pre-purchase your Aurene Elder Dragon collector statue. We have pre-purchase until the 20th. This statue is a mirror of how you see Aurene in the game right now in the Hall of Monuments, right down to that iridescent shine, which is put on there through a process that we talked about a little bit on the website called vacuplating. Each of these individual statues goes into a vacuum chamber where the color formula is vaporized, condenses, and binds to the statue to create that iridescent color layer. So we've been looking at some behind the scenes pictures of that process. This statue also comes with a code for an in-game statue, an in-game cape, not an in-game statue, an in-game Aurene cape that Cal is modeling right now on his character, looking extremely dapper. Yeah. So you can pre-purchase until August 20th, so you have one more week on that one. And speaking of pre-purchase, End of Dragons is available for pre-purchase now as well, and comes with some bonuses that you can use on your account right away, including the Xingje title, the Xingje Mosaic Cape, and the Flame Serpent weapon chest, where you can get your choice of weapon for that. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you both for coming and running us through this. Cal, thank you for everything. Speaking of powerful, that would be
I could keep going. Like, I could talk about Guild Wars 2 for so many hours. It's kind of unreal.
Right? Well,
but we'll make sure to save a little bit for the future.
More elite specs are coming.
Yep.
So, but for now, we will see you in the beta next Tuesday, and thank you for hanging out with us.